We are in the middle of a generosity crisis, and it makes sense when the cost of living has gone way up and students are taking on more and more debt just to get an education. But even when I have some spare money that I want to donate, I don't really know how to find a good organization for a cause that I care about. And even if I find one that aligns with my values, honestly, I'm never really sure where my donation goes or what impact it has. That is, until now. This is Srikar, and he's trying to change all of this. He's the co-founder of Impact Labs, a platform that helps you find and donate to causes you care about. They've analyzed thousands of nonprofits to uncover what drives lasting change. And in this conversation, we unpack all of it. In this episode, you'll discover the hidden flaw in how we measure nonprofits, a new framework for measuring real impact, and what actually drives long-term social change.
A lot of what research on donors has told us results, especially millennial donors and younger, they really care about outcomes. They really care about seeing data that tells them, what happened at the end of the day. There's a lot of research that shows that compared to, Gen X or baby boomers, millennials care pretty strongly about social causes, and they're attached more to causes than they are to individual organizations. Whereas like older donors care more about particular organizations, whether it's like nonprofits, academic institutions, et cetera, that they donate to. I think with younger donors, there's an attachment more to the actual cause itself that they care about. And so that was a big reason why we built Impact Labs to be what it is now and what it will be in the future with our fund strategy. Our products are based around these causes, around these social causes. And then we do the work to find the best nonprofits we can that'll deliver the results that matter for those causes, right? And then share all that information with the donors. And so I think to deliver on our promise of making it easy and letting donors track their impact, we need to also kind of educate them on like why we're building the funds the way we're building them. Like, why did we pick these nonprofits? Why do these particular outcomes matter? Like, why does permanent housing matter? Things like that. Like, we can't just, build a fund and then not explain like why we chose the things we chose for that fund. So I think a lot of the research and analysis that we've done, we need to make it very transparent. And so I think that's why a lot of our content focuses on education, is because we want to be transparent. And then we also want the donors to like learn sort of what works and what doesn't work, at least from our point of view and from all the research that we're using's point of view.
It makes sense from the older generation side of things being very organization attached, and the millennial side of things being very cause attached and being very incentivized by seeing actual impact. Because a lot of times you do put money into some organization and you kind of wonder that's where the end of the story is. Sometimes you might get some updates, but that's typically the end of the story.
We've done a lot of research on like donor behavior and stuff, and there's a pretty strong data point out there that says like, I think like something like 75% of recurring donors like continue giving because they receive something that points to the tangible impact in their donations. Like, I think what you're talking about, that it's very transactional, where you donate based on like an emotional response to something that's happening. But to keep that going beyond the initial donation, or you need more than just like the emotional response.
If you like this conversation, then I think you would love the Good Fortune newsletter. Each week, I share new impact businesses from around the world and give you a playbook breaking down the strategies they use to start and scale their operation. In these newsletters, you'll discover new trends and businesses that are changing the world for good. Learn from the impact founders who are on the ground every day building these businesses, and get actionable tips for launching and growing your own impact business. Click the link below to learn more, and while you're down there, you can like and subscribe to this channel so you can catch each conversation as soon as it gets released. Your support means the world to me, and it helps this channel find new people and inspire new businesses that are good for people and planet. Thanks for watching, and now back to the episode.
Did anything pop out in your research, not from millennials, but from Gen Z in terms of what motivates them and their behavior? Because I see a lot that millennials were the ones that said they care about impact, and Gen Z are the ones that are actually doing something about it. But curious to know what your research is saying.
Honestly, we don't have a ton of data on that end with Gen Z yet, and even with like the studies we were cited through building impact labs and stuff, oftentimes ends at millennials because they've been done in the last 5 years. So there's just not enough sort of evaluation of Gen Z donations, or not enough of them yet in general. So I don't have a great answer for you there, but I think like from my point of view, with how Gen Z talks about causes and social impact in such a widespread way, like they're very effective at sort of spreading messages and campaigns, right, through whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is. And I think maybe even more so than millennials, that data point I was talking to earlier, where compared to Gen X or baby boomers, millennials care more about social causes and see themselves as philanthropists. And I think we don't have that data point for Gen Z yet, but I would guess that that's even higher for Gen Z. I think there's a strong strong sort of movement and strong sort of attachment to social causes. Yeah. So I hope to get more data on Gen Z from our own user base over the next year or so. But as of now, I think it's just sort of anecdotal.
Hard to tell. Yeah. It's interesting because there are also a few different indicators of how you quote unquote care about impact causes. This mechanism is very much rooted in the grounds of donating to a portfolio of organizations. Whereas, again, this is unvalidated and anecdotal. Maybe Gen Z is more motivated in their buying behavior and choosing the right companies to actually consume from, rather than choosing the right organizations to donate to. But again, I guess time will tell. But on the other hand, I've worked with a couple of student teams recently. They're all working on circularity projects in the textile industry. I think one stat that came up was that per capita, Australia is buying the most fast fashion in the world. It's something like between 45 and 50 new pieces of clothing per person per year.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of that is driven by Gen Z and millennials. So there's kind of conflicting data all over the place, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Impact Labs platform over the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've seen it on our website, and it's our mission to sort of make it easy for people to donate to sort of causes they care about and track their impact. That make it easy part was very intentional because, I talked about the impact tracking side of things as a gap we're trying to fill, right? And one of the main reasons for starting Impact Labs. But also part of the reason why a lot of people don't give is because they don't really know how to find the right organizations to give to. There are evaluators out there, but in my opinion, historically, the way they evaluate organizations hasn't been really focused on impact. It's kind of about stuff that the industry is kind of moving away from. And so I think to your point, a distinction between it is a kind of very millennial way to think of what's the easiest way for me to, create social impact. And so that's kind of this is our answer to that. I am curious to learn more about if Gen Z thinks similarly, or they'll attach more strongly to particular finding the right sort of organization or the right, cause, and not really so much about the ease and the automation of things that we're doing.
Curious to know what your process looks like when you're diving into and creating some of these funds, because you dive into the fund and there's maybe 4 or 5 different organizations. What's your process look like for vetting those and choosing them and kind of determining the allocation of the fund?
Essentially, we start really broadly. So we have an internal database that we built with publicly available data across, data from the IRS, and then also from, organizations' websites that we start with. So when we're building a fund for a new cause, for example, education, we look at education in the San Francisco Bay Area because, again, we're regional. We look at all 501c3 nonprofits. We sort of filter for all of these nonprofits that tag themselves with certain, they're called NTEE codes, but basically a classification of what is their focus. Or we scrape through all their mission statements to find relevant flags for whether they fit for this particular cause. Then we spit out this few hundred, usually a couple hundred organizations in that region for that cause. then we have a methodology where we look at the breadth of their impact as well as the depth of their impact. So like this is something else that we believe we're adding that previous evaluators haven't really done. And what we mean by breadth is like how many outcomes have they delivered, how many outputs have they delivered. So for education, it's like how many students or how many children did they help if they're focused on children. Whereas the depth is like, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that help mean? What does that education mean? Does it just mean that they gave, reading materials to students in elementary school? Or does it mean that they help, high school students with the resources and tutoring they needed over a period of time to graduate high school, to find a job, things like that. And so we sort of assess on a relative basis the depth of each of these nonprofits and combine that with like just the raw number of like how many outputs they've delivered. So that was really important for us because that's another thing that I think we were kind of frustrated with is like, it's really hard to compare two organizations that maybe are both under education, which is a very broad cause, and compare just the raw number of people they helped, right? Like they could be doing very different things and both are important. But we need to figure out one, like what is the difference in like the actual service that they're doing, the actual output that they're delivering. And then two, this is where like the external research comes in is like, which, for the sake of this fund, are we saying is more important for solving the actual crisis at hand, the issue at hand? And this is always going to be somewhat subjective, right? Like, for housing and shelter, for example, like you're comparing things like permanent housing versus shelter housing versus like giving people money to stay in their homes so they don't become unhoused. And so these are things that we have to make a call on when we're choosing 4 or 5 nonprofits at the end of the day from this list of 200 to build a fund. But we want those decisions to be based on like the best available research. So we look at several peer-reviewed studies for this particular cause that we're building a fund for, and we essentially prioritize outcomes, right? So we want to build a fund that addresses the cause from multiple angles. We want to have permanent housing in there. We want to have shelter housing in there. We want to have financial assistance in there, but we want to be able to prioritize. And so that also determines how we assign weights to the nonprofits at the end of the day. So, and the prioritization comes from research through these peer-reviewed academic studies that have data on like what actually works and what doesn't work quite as well. And so we use that to always fall back on when we make these decisions. And then that kind of determines scores that we've developed for all of these nonprofits by looking at their breadth and depth. That ultimately gives us like the top few nonprofits that we put in the fund. And so we have the fund at that point. We also work with the nonprofits afterwards. We reach out to them. We try to sort of establish a relationship with them and get data from them that's more accurate on an ongoing basis after that. So that we start with this publicly available data, but our goal is always to sort of improve that data directly from the nonprofit themselves.
I wish this level of rigor was done at an aggregate level because it's so like at this Bay Area, specific cause level, it's so amazing that out of the hundreds or thousands of nonprofits, you've combed through them all. You've looked through the level of impact from how many people they serve and their breadth to the depth of like how much tangible impact are they serving to those people, and have come up with like, here's, our mix of the most bang for your buck, essentially. As someone who is maybe not necessarily like deeply passionate about one specific area, but is generally aligned to sustainability and social impact as a whole, it's really difficult for me to assess and understand where I put my money. And so I love the rigor and intentionality that you're putting behind all of these funds and how you develop them.
That's the goal, right? And like we're starting regionally and we're starting cause-based, but eventually we want people to come to Impact Labs and then help them figure out whether, if we don't have the funds, if our catalog of funds today doesn't sort of speak to you, we want to sort of understand, what it is you're looking for. Like if you're the type of donor that says like, hey, I want to donate, I've decided that it's January 2025. Decided that this year I'm going to, donate more. I just need to figure out where. We want to be able to have our onboarding process basically get you to that point.
So you have a handful of new products coming out, and as someone who has been in the product and strategy space for a long time, how much of your new product development is rooted in data and what you're seeing versus just some of your product instinct?
Ooh, man, great question. So I mean, I'd like to say that the vast majority is data, right? Like we're always making data driven decisions. I mean, but the truth is, it's always going to be a blend, and especially I think in the early days of something like this, it does lean. It inevitably the smaller decisions will lean towards instinct. So the way I like to think about it is like the larger decisions, the larger bets, and like just the foundational sort of strategic decisions that you make, or that we make, should be largely driven by data, trends, research, these things. But there's so many decisions you have to make at this stage, right? Like every single day you're making some decision that'll influence, you know, a, a 10 other things. So I think those smaller decisions is like it would be impossible to sort of make those with data. Oftentimes we just don't even have the data. It's starting off, something. Hopefully, a year from now, 2 years from now, like we'll have data that'll help us make a lot of these decisions. Like, should we enable, maybe a distinction is like something like matching campaigns, for example, right? The decision to sort of invest in building that out from a product standpoint I think a good mix of both. So that came largely from a data standpoint. We have interest in matching. We know there's so many reports out there that talk about how like matching is like a great for even at a nonprofit level. For an individual nonprofit, matching campaigns are often how they like make a lot of smaller nonprofits make a lot of their donations every year, especially around Giving Tuesday or the holiday season, whatever. So it's like a table stakes thing that we need to have. And so that a lot of that was data driven. It's also like from an intuition standpoint, it's also pretty obvious. It's just something that from a marketing standpoint, we need to have. So I think that's an example of something that's both. Whereas like things like even the fund strategy, the decision to do a fund strategy was built around funds and not nonprofits, individual nonprofits, was data driven for a lot of the data we talked about earlier in the call. But then things that are more specific, like, from a design standpoint, how do we design a fund? What kinds of things do we highlight up top above the fold versus these are things that like we rely heavily on intuition for. And then hopefully over time, we'll get more data to like make them better. But we just have to make calls especially from a design perspective, I think, on a bunch of things. But larger decisions, data, smaller decisions, user intuition and your experience, and then hopefully learn.
Everyone likes to say that they're data driven first, and I think the way you framed it makes total sense. Is rely on data and research to make the macro decisions, and the micro day-to-day decisions, you just have to kind of rely on the fact that you've done enough research for now, act on instinct, and then hopefully develop some sort of feedback mechanism to where you can act fast, put it out into the market, and then learn and gather your own data to then make a more data informed decision over time.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, a product intuition is its own weird form of data. Like intuition is something that you have from the years of like qualitative data that you've subconsciously built, right? So that also, I think it goes hand in hand.
You've had the MVP out for a handful of months, and now you're adding a bunch of new features to the product suite. Curious, any major challenges that you've had in the launch of the MVP, or any like big decisions that you had to make?
Yeah, so many. So I think challenges. I think that we were slower to launch the MVP than we wanted to. We wanted to launch it sometime last year. Ended up launching, kind of in February. And a lot of that was just product challenges, just the newness of like us building something from scratch. I'm my background. I didn't get a lot into my background at the beginning of the call, but it's on the business side of things, it's business operations and strategy. I'm basically everything on our operations side of things. I'm like figuring out how we're doing a lot of the stuff, how we're building funds, how we're going to market with these funds, all the marketing stuff as well. And then Shub, who's the other founder of Impact Labs, his background is on the product side of things, so product design, product management, and even consulting in that world. And so neither of us were super technical, which is in itself is a challenge when you're building, from scratch. He's definitely more technical than I am. He's completely our product guy now. And so a lot of the building came from him, and a lot of us building this was learning how to build this web application and Webflow first, learning the challenges that come with that, these third-party tools, and then like the benefits of moving everything in-house, which is also part of what we're working on right now from the MVP. So like these things just took longer than they would have if I was ace coder. So I think that's we knew that going in, that was going to be a challenge for us. From like a strategic standpoint, decisions that we've had to make and challenges there, like a lot. I think early on, a lot of the vision behind this, included funds, but also included other things that we had to put away. Like there was a whole gamification concept to this. So like, how do we make it more fun to donate, and having like impact points and gamifying this whole experience was this like grand vision early on. And then we got really good advice that just said we need to simplify things a lot. It's basic advice, but like when you're in the weeds of this every day, it's like something you definitely need to hear. And so that was one decision of like, let's simplify things. We need to, and that's how, when we lashed on to like the make it easy to support causes you care about as the core sort of message, and then building around that kind of became our North Star, and doing away with all these other things, at least for now. So I think just stripping down to the basics of what our mission is, like, was a key thing that we had to go through.
I hear that. That's maybe one of the biggest or most frequent challenges that I hear. It's somewhere around non-technical. The term is very relative, but building technical product as a non-technical founder is by far and large the most frequent challenge that people have to face up front. So I'm curious if you have one piece of advice for anyone who is passionate about a particular sustainability or social impact related area, and they're looking to build something that may be out of their technical capabilities. If you have any piece of advice for them starting out, what would that be?
Yeah, I think one, plan for more time than you think it'll take, no matter what it is. But especially as you were saying, a non-technical person. But I think it's kind of a catch-22, right? There's so many great tools out there that make it easy to build things now. Low code, no code apps, for anyone to get started, which is awesome. And I encourage everyone to do it. If you want to build something, like, it's easier than ever to like learn how to do it yourself, right? The flip side of that is it'll take longer than you think. It's not, even if you're using a no-code app to build something that you think is super basic, like there's a little bit of a learning curve that even comes with that if you are non-technical. And so just investing that time up front, or allocating for enough of that learning up front before you get into like what you think is the fun stuff of like actually, executing your vision of what you dreamt up. Like, yes, that's fun, that'll come, but like you need to sort of like spend the early days kind of just learning so that things don't break later and just make things worse for everyone. And so just create sort of a plan that allows for that, and definitely do it, but just plan for it.
If you liked this conversation, then I think you would love the Good Fortune newsletter. Each week, I share new impact businesses from around the world and give you a playbook breaking down the strategies they use to start and scale their operation. In these newsletters, you'll discover new trends and businesses that are changing the world for good. Learn from the impact founders who are on the ground every day building these businesses. And get actionable tips for launching and growing your own impact business. Click the link below to learn more, and while you're down there, you can like and subscribe to this channel so you can catch each conversation as soon as it gets released. Your support means the world to me, and it helps this channel find new people and inspire new businesses that are good for people and planet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.